We are here with Bryan Bruce from Substack and Head to Head. Welcome to the show, Bryan. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Great to be here, Blake and Paul. Thank you for inviting me.
I'll start. So why did you decide to create Head to Head as opposed to what you were doing before with all your well-known, excellent documentaries?
Well, first of all, uh, independent public journalism is in a terrible state these days. I can't get funding for documentaries as I used to make, like Inside Child Poverty and Who Owns New Zealand Now, and the food crisis. First of all, the government pulled all of the public journalism funding, and also the broadcasters don't think that there is an audience for independent and analytical documentary. So I guess I became a dinosaur. But rather than die out, I thought, bugger this, I'm going to try and use the Substack, which I was learning about. And so that's how it came about. And it's been a bit of an evolution since I started it in April of last year. I didn't know who was going to support it or whether people would listen or whatever. But then I had to teach myself about eCam and streaming. And old guys like me, old dogs, and you might hear one from next door, find it hard to learn new tricks, you know. So it's taken a while. But now I do a regular head to head. And the basis of head to head is that I don't know what I don't know. So I let the interviewee set the agenda. What's on your mind today? What's top of mind for you? And then I just listen to that and ask some questions. So it's quite enjoyable, but it also, I think, spreads information that isn't readily accessible on mainstream media.
So then how do you respond to claims like from Wyndham Peter during the last election that, certain media outlets um you know um selling out to the previous government, and the media fund was made up by the last government of Bryan media and all these kind of claims?
Well, bullshit, really. I mean, my documentaries actually criticised the previous government for a number of things. Uh, so they weren't buying my opinion. The problem we have is that unless I can get a sponsor who says, you go for it, Bryan, we're not going to have any editorial control, you can say what you like, you can push opinions that you like, unless I can find that independent, private uh, source of funding, then it's really the government and the taxpayer who pays for independent journalism. It's not a particular political party. And fourth estate journalism, its function is actually to question the underlying premises of policy of what people are saying. And so it isn't true that I was bought. If anybody looked at what I made, they would know that. So I think we do have a problem. We still have a problem because uh, uh, this government funds Radio New Zealand, for example. And while I see a lot of good things or hear a lot of good things on Radio New Zealand, I hear a lot of soft journalism too. And I'm not quite sure why that is. You could argue it's because they're a bit frightened of their masters, or that tough journos find it hard to get jobs.
Pe- Final question from me for now before I hand over to Paul. We see you are also very critical of the current government. So do you feel like this is probably, and we've asked a few people this and love to get your opinion on it, one of the worst and right-wing government that we've had in our lifetime?
Yeah, I've lived long enough to see the introduction of neoliberalism. I watched the Bolger Ruth Richardson government. I watched the Longy Roger Douglas government. And it's really a natural extension of the decisions we made in 1984 that government should withdraw from the marketplace, wasn't in the business of being in business. And this government has put this on steroids. I mean, it is a very, very right-wing government. I call neoliberalism the politics and economics of selfishness. It isn't about a we society. It's about promoting a me society, the haves and the have-nots. And I think you just have to look at the latest speech by David Seymour
Mm.
to appreciate how much of a me society he wants. He talks about two tribes. One tribe is the entrepreneurial people who deserve support, and the other lot are the hangers-on, basically. Well, that's a terrible view of our society, and it's not only is it wrong, and not only does his remarks about Maori absolutely misunderstand the Te Tiriti, the treaty, then he is actually one of the worst things to have happened to democracy in our country, because he's actually, the things he says, although they sound reasonable, are actually very anti-democratic.
Well, I was going to bring up the speech yesterday because on Friday, it blew my mind that somebody that we elected in this country would actually use the phrase "woke mind virus." Like it's a terrible term. It's a dog whistle term. It's one that Elon Musk loves to use to describe his trans child. It reeks of horrible alt-right talking points to me. And then, of course, you get what Elon did during the inauguration, and to me, it all sort of ties in. Feels like it's going down the same sort of road. One of the things I find most interesting about, and it sort of ties everything in a little bit around funding for journalism and funding for media creation that you brought up before. Creative NZ has been really specifically careful about people who are working on content at the moment around Indigenous voices, and particularly around issues to do with islanders. I know that they did some funding not that long ago on re-education information around the Dawn raids. After there was the apology from the Prime Minister a few years ago around it, they wanted to create new resources for it. So they did a whole bunch of funding. I don't know if this is on the record or not, but they met with a couple of those organizations that they funded at the beginning of last year to say, so the soon-to-be Deputy Prime Minister has obviously got a bug in his bonnet about islanders saying pretty much anything. We just need to make sure you're not going to do anything to piss them off, because that's our funding for the future that's at risk. I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, how much influence do you think politicians should have on funding creative outlets, journalism, the media that we interact with?
I'm not very familiar with what's been happening with Creative New Zealand, but just to take a general thing from your conversation there, it's really a question about what is the purpose of government, you know? And there are various areas which have become politicized that maybe shouldn't be. To have a intelligent, fair society. If I can just move to education for a minute. We used to have an apolitical education system. We had a director of education who wasn't politically appointed, who was an educationalist. And teachers talked to teachers about latest methods of teaching and all of that, and it worked very well. Then there came a point, largely, I think, in the rise of neoliberalism, that politicians decided that they would have more control over the education system. And now every 3 years, teachers have to listen to what the latest Minister of Education has to say. And the latest Minister of Education has no educational qualifications. She was a reality television producer. Now, without saying anything against her, her background simply isn't fitted to her job. You wouldn't hire somebody with that job description if it was a private company. Well, look, that's just one example of where government really has to move away from the area. It's, as I say this, I'm now reminded of what I said just a little while ago, was that neoliberalism says government shouldn't be involved in business. Well, if it isn't involved in business, it certainly shouldn't be involved in education. It certainly shouldn't be involved in monitoring what people say and think and do. We do have freedom of speech in this country. It isn't the job of government to interfere with that. And when it does, that's called censorship, you know? And when it only wants to have the messages released that it wants, that's called propaganda.
This government actually has a few media people involved with it. Thinking, just sort of putting my thinking cap on here, you've got Melissa Lee. She's been involved in broadcasting, if I remember correctly. There's a New Zealand First MP whose name slips my mind that was also involved. That's right, yeah, Jenny Marcroft. She was obviously involved in broadcasting. Erica had a role, as you mentioned, in reality TV. Did Paul Goldsmith, do you know if he's ever had a role in broadcasting? And he's our broadcasting minister now.
Don't know.
Yeah, it feels like the wrong people in the wrong jobs there for me.
Well, I think that if you go through the list, there are a few people who are in jobs that may be inappropriate. It may not be that it may be that they've had experience, but if you put somebody who was a gun lobbyist in charge of, reviewing our gun policies and doesn't want to talk to the police about it, the people who would have to administer this, then that's a bit odd, don't you think? If we have a person who was in banking now in charge of our health system, who doesn't know anything about public health, who has an ideological view about maybe we shouldn't have so much public health, maybe we should have privatization of our hospitals. That to me is not a particularly good idea. Here is somebody who is ideologically based rather than purpose-based. This is a person who has no background in public health of any sort, apart from going to the doctor himself. I think that what you need to do is pick horses for courses, I mean, one question is, why was Rauti demoted? Is it because he wasn't as ideologically driven? Was it because he was getting too much criticism from doctors about not actually putting patient health first, but putting politics first? I don't know. I mean, I haven't read or heard any commentary on why Rauti was demoted. Have you?
No, other than it's the start of the year. They didn't do too well in the last poll for last year, or the first poll for this year, and health was seen as one of the most significant reasons behind that.
Well, one of the issues, of course, is that there's this constant litany of, I don't know, propaganda, I guess comes close to that. The budget had blown out. That this was, they were terribly incompetent, these people. The board was terribly incompetent. The budget's blown out. But the reality is we have been underfunding public health for several decades now. And not just this government, but the previous governments have been underfunding public health. And we have to absolutely say to New Zealanders, this is what taxes is about. If you lower taxes, you're not going to get certain things that are absolutely essential for every New Zealander, not just people who can't afford public health, but you. If you go to the hospital and a car crash tomorrow, you're going to expect free care, and that's a good thing. Now, somebody has to pay for that, and we pay for it with our taxes.
Mm-hmm. With your experience in journalism, I'm guessing you've had a fair bit of access to politicians over those years. One of the criticisms that's come through about Christopher Luxon in particular is that he's sort of our first prime minister to pull away from that access to media. He's reduced his stand-ups. He doesn't do the bridge walk as often as he used to. Have you seen? Is this the sort of a gradual thing that's led to a point where we've got a prime minister now who's like, I don't want to deal with the media as much, or is this a bit of a shock from the experiences that you've had dealing with politicians in the past?
Well, to be honest with you, Paul, I don't talk to politicians.
No, fair enough. You're very lucky in that respect.
So what I do is, and I've had that criticism, why didn't I talk to the minister of this and the minister of that? Well, we know what the minister thinks. We've got the policy. I'm not going to spend a second of my time asking the minister what he or she thinks when I know what they think, when I know what they say. So I actually haven't spoken to a lot of politicians in my years. But it is true that if you want to run a basic dictatorship, the first thing you do is you muzzle the press, you control the media, and you can control the media by not talking to them, and only talking to them when you've got the photo opportunity or you have something you want to push. So what we have seen, I think, in the last 20 odd years, maybe going back a bit further, is the rise of the PR departments. The former journalists who become, massagers of the message, and they're in the background. Now, I can tell you that they'll be watching your program, they'll be listening to you, and they'll be listening to me, the PR people, and then they'll be going, oh, I see, well, we have to massage the message this way. So we live in complicated times. Maybe Luxton realizes he isn't such a good communicator. Maybe he hasn't got the common touch. I don't know. I don't know what his PR people are recommending or what he thinks. But I don't know about you, but I think that comes across as some kind of arrogance, really.
I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier regarding education in the moment, but I just want to touch on the health conversation we've been having. How alarming is it to you that we now have a health minister that's anti-abortion, that's proven to have an anti-abortion group at a university he went to, and is it has some Christian views that he had promised not to bring into politics, but that yet to be seen.
So are you asking me whether Brown's faith is determining his health views? Is that the question?
Basically, yeah.
Well, I think if we're honest, we all come to situations with our views, don't we? And I can't imagine that anybody, any politician, any person in a position of responsibility is blind to the fact that they come with a whole lot of opinions, background, faith, views, whatever. I do. You can tell this from the way I'm talking. I wouldn't be doing the kind of work if I didn't believe certain philosophical things. So Mr. Brown is entitled to what he thinks. What he's not entitled to do is impose those views as policy for everyone. He has to do that difficult job of putting what he believes to one side and thinking what is the best for people, because that is the job. We elect a House of Representatives, people to represent us. And the problem is we have elected Mr. Brown. And so we have to suck it up. We may not like it, but that's the democratic process.
And then going back to education, we talk about, Stanford is supposed to be the education minister, quote, quote, but we see a lot more of David Seymour, who is supposedly the associate education minister, than we do Stanford, which I find really fascinating. And the fact that when he just, and this is going back to my disability advocacy, he's taking on the kids with rare diseases, saying, "Oh, we brought in this STAR program so that you have to go to school. You know, we'll mark you down when you go to a medical appointment that you need for your disability." And this ideology is terrible, in my opinion.
Well, we're seeing quite a lot of policy that isn't helpful to children who are either disabled or they come from poorer backgrounds. First of all, let's give them the cheapest lunch. We don't really want to feed the kids, but let's give them the cheapest lunches we possibly can. Let's punish their parents if they don't turn up at school. Oh, by the way, let's get rid of the free bus fares so that kids can get to school. So we'll make it more difficult for kids to get to school, and then if they don't get there, we'll punish them, their parents. Now, all of that is just contradictory and stupid. It reveals someone who hasn't had much contact with children or people with disabilities or mental health issues or anything. He's superbly not qualified for this job. And that's my view. My view is that, if he's the Minister of Education, his background as an electrical engineer and then going off to become a disciple of Atlas doesn't qualify him to be a Minister of Education, in my view.
Actually, I'd like to touch on something you just mentioned, the Atlas organization. This is one that Seymour loves to say, big conspiracy theory on the left. As an organization, it only has about a dozen employees, but it's often pointed to by people on the left as a mechanism that's out there trying to control things, trying to push things towards that neoliberal. No, people on the left point to it as almost like a big bad puppet master for Atlas. I don't know a huge amount about it, but I keep coming across the name. I know it has links to a number of organizations within the country. I'm kind of curious, Bryan, what your perspective is on that organization.
Yeah, well, it's first of all, although Seymour would deny that he is linked to it or influenced by it, nevertheless, he went and attended some think tanks in Canada, and there are photographs of him graduating, or I can't remember exactly whether it was graduating, but it's certainly he's there. He's certainly learning about this stuff, and a lot of his policies are consistent with what Atlas promotes. And there are very powerful private individuals like the Koch brothers, who there's a lot of money involved in this. And why is there a lot of money involved in this? Because people who are wealthy want to hold on to their wealth, however it is gained, and particularly if it's gained by not taxing their wealth, they want to hold on to it. Wealth doesn't trickle down. Wealth trickles up. And that's the way they want to keep it. Now, it's not just New Zealand. What has happened is that this is neoliberal on steroids because it benefits the wealthy. And you can talk about Atlas or you can talk about ACT or whatever. That is the philosophy. The philosophy is wealth sticks. Let's make it stick. Make it stick with us. Let's have a low wage economy where we're getting people to work for as little as possible. Legally, that's what minimum wage is. Minimum wage is the lowest amount you're legally allowed to charge to pay somebody.
I would pay you less if I could.
I would pay you less if I could. So we want to lower our costs, and we want to maximise the amount that we can gain from a society and keep. So Atlas, ACT, I don't care what you call it. That's the philosophy.
Have you got any more questions, Paul?
Probably, but we'll take them off the air so we don't spend all day using up all the data that's out there.
Okay. What I'll get you to do, Bryan, is to stay with us while we chat off air for a few minutes.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been good to talk with you. And I hope one day, not too far from now, Blake, you might come on my program.
I will do. We'll organise that shortly.
And thank you, Paul.
Brilliant.
I'd like to
Thank you.
talk to you too.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.